A global dairy market, Fourth Amendment protections, an NRCS case that cannot rely on in-house expertise, 45Z tax credits and what crops might qualify, tariffs and ag trade deficits. Man, that's all on the agenda for today's conversation, and that's all before this guy hits us with the news of the day.
Live with only 7 shopping days until Election Day via Farm Journal broadcast, this is AgriTalk. This morning we'll begin with a conversation with Farm Journal wordsmith Chris Bennett. Then it's Mitchell Hora from Continuum Ag. Later, Betty Resnick from the American Farm Bureau Federation. And directly following the news, Karen Bonert from Farm Journal's Milk. I'm a handsome newsman, Davis Michelson, and now, here's the host of AgriTalk, Chip Flory.
All right, Davis. Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And welcome to AgriTalk. Boy, I tell you, this list of items that we've got to talk about today, here's the deal. Every now and then, the headline conversations that take place, I feel like it needs a little bit of background. Okay. To completely understand all the issues that farmers are challenged to understand, we need to get a little additional background. So we're going to do that on a couple of the conversations today. Betty Resnick from AFBF is going to be here to talk about some ag trade deficit and what is leading that. And I understand she's got some updated numbers, so I'm looking forward to the conversation with Betty. 45Z tax credits. How many times have we talked about this in the last 10 shows, Davis?
Yeah.
It seems like it's coming up all the time. Yeah. It is coming up all of the time because it is that important. Well, Mitchell's coming with some new perspective on that, and the old Farm Journal watchdog is after it again, man. He's got a couple of stories that I want to talk about today. A new one on agweb.com just this morning is talking about a battle between a South Dakota farmer and the NRCS up there in South Dakota that's been going on for 20 years. 20 years. Now, remember Chevron deference and the Supreme Court decision on that, saying that any of the 3-4-letter agencies, federal agencies, cannot rely on in-house expertise in their decision and implementation of the laws, rules, and regulations. Well, that's part of what is being challenged right now. So we're going to get into that with Chris Bennett. Okay, Let's get to the news. What do you got, buddy?
Well, the National Weather Service is looking for moderate to heavy snow over parts of the northern and central Rockies today. Temperatures will be 20 to 35 degrees above average over parts of the Central Plains to the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. Can confirm, by the way. There is a slight risk of severe thunderstorms over parts of the middle and lower Mississippi Valley, central, southern plains on Wednesday. And here locally in Kansas City, USA, we're looking at 73 degrees. Kind of hazy, I would call it. But man, the wind really picked up overnight. Windy.
Yeah, it is windy. It's windy here in northeast Iowa, too. 72 degrees. Look at that.
All right. Well, with 1 week until Election Day, Vice President Kamala Harris is set to deliver a pivotal campaign speech at the Ellipse near the White House. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump will be rallying supporters in Pennsylvania, visiting Drexel Hill and Allentown. Voter turnout is already surging, Chip, with over 43 million ballots cast across 47 states and the District of Columbia. Federal investigators are probing coordinated arson incidents targeting ballot boxes in Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington, destroying hundreds of ballots. Authorities believe the attacks were targeted and intentional, and they come amid heightened warnings from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security about potential election-related violence driven by voter fraud grievances. Only in Portland, right, Chip? Oh, maybe Vancouver,
cameras. There are cameras everywhere. How does this guy or this person think that they are going to get away with this? It blows my mind. Yeah.
Well, President Joe Biden will visit the Port of Baltimore in Maryland today to announce a $3 billion Inflation Reduction Act investment aimed at improving and electrifying port infrastructure across the United States. Republican lawmakers have called on USDA to provide explanations regarding the oversight of Pure Prairie Poultry, Inc., which filed for bankruptcy shortly after receiving substantial USDA funding. The situation has raised concerns about the department's management of grants and loans, as well as its impact on farmers and the poultry industry. The Minnesota-based chicken company received $45.6 million in USDA funding in 2022. That was to expand its processing plant in Charles City, Iowa.
Okay, those birds that were euthanized in Iowa, it was not only because of processing capacity. Tyson was ready to buy them, but it sounds like there was an argument over how the profits would be split from those birds. So they ended up just killing them. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, the U.S. Department of Energy announced a new solicitation to purchase up to 3 million barrels of oil for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This move comes in response to recent price declines in oil markets and aims to replenish the nation's emergency oil stockpile. Delivery expected to take place in April and May. Chip, let's go to Karen on that note.
All right. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Let's bring her in. Karen Bonert, editor of Farm Journal's Milk. Good morning, Karen.
Hey, Chip.
All right. So we talked briefly last week about what you learned at the World Dairy Summit. Let's continue that conversation today. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, there was, of course, a lot of takeaways, but, Chip, from climate variability and market composition, policy, economics, we can talk about a lot of things. And it's not just impacting regions like the United States or North America. It's regions across the globe. They're navigating under a complex set of circumstances. And there's a lot of parallels. Like, for example, in South America in 2010, 60% of the farms were producing about 27% of the milk supply. Today, Chip, that figure sits at 48% of the farms, so nearly half, and that's 13% of the milk supply. And then in Germany, they're saying that farms with less than 100 dairy cows are more likely to go out of business. I think that's probably mimics here in the United States. But what they're saying is farms that are greater than 100 cows are not necessarily showing signs to expand or to grow because they're noting the uncertainty in the future policy and regulations is it's playing a factor in their decision making. So the takeaway is policy solutions must be cost effective to farmers, whether you're in the United States or you're across the globe. And in 2021, Africa, as we talked last week, their imports stood at about $5 billion US. And so all eyes are on Africa, not just the United States, because they know that this is a huge emerging market. So I say the takeaway is two things: collaboration, and everybody's going to look at how they're going to grow exports, North America included. And so we've got to make sure that our U.S. dairy products are just exceptional as they are, but we got to keep an eye on that.
Yeah. And I would imagine the quality does have something to do with the fact that the U.S. is a successful exporter of dairy products. Karen, good stuff.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
All right. Get more on what happened in Paris at the World Dairy Summit. Go to www.dairyherd.com. Okay, we're talking land rights next. Chris Bennett from Farm Journal.
The truth is hard to come by these days unless you listen to AgriTalk.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. I'm Chip Flory. Glad you're with us on this Tuesday morning for a conversation with Chris Bennett from Farm Journal and agweb.com. Chris, welcome back to AgriTalk, my friend. How are you doing?
Chip, good morning, brother. It's a privilege to be on here with you.
Excellent. Glad that you're here. Chris, you always do a great job watchdogging some of the issues out there for us, and there are a couple of stories that you've published recently, including just one this morning. But I want to start off talking about this story about the Thomas family out in Pennsylvania and the fact that, it seems to me like Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission officer, he might need a lesson or two in the Fourth Amendment. Tell us about this.
Yes, sir. It cuts to the heart of what private property ownership is. When I heard the details, I had to do a double take, make sure I was understanding correctly. Many of your listeners, Chip, will know about open fields and the government's claim that they have a right to enter your greater private property. This is that, but on steroids. Thomas had land on a lake. He had land on navigable waters, and the state, by statute, in other words, they can point to code, they can literally point to the words in the law in Pennsylvania, claimed the right, and they did so, to come onto his land, to search his private property without warrant, without probable cause, without consent, literally, right up to his doorstep. They did not enter his home, but they, I guess you could say in a roundabout way, they did everything else, Chip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you get right down to this, Chris, I mean, this officer was thinking that the landowner was breaking the rules, and I think it was fishing with too many fishing poles, something like that. But it's almost like he had a vendetta against this landowner, and he used the power of his office to pursue it.
Right. And there's greater questions here as well. If the state Boat and Fish Commission or any power of the state, any office of the state can come onto your land in Pennsylvania via navigable waters, then you have this wide open door that essentially is meaningless. In other words, okay, I've got an acre beside a lake. What if I've got two? What if I've got 1,000 acres of farmland beside water? Does the government with a straight face claim to have the right to come to my doorstep? And they do. Now, like always, Chip, when I asked state of Pennsylvania, could I please have comment on this case? It was a no. Litigation is ongoing. I will bet my bank account right now that when litigation is over, they still will not comment on the case. And also, there's another thing that I always ask, Chip, and that is, hey, forget the case. I'll push that off the table. Could y'all please explain your policy on private land, what you're allowed to do? The answer to that, almost invariably, almost 100%, Chip, regardless of which case it is also, it's a big no.
Yeah. Chris, what really grabbed your attention on this story then, and what makes it a story that needs to be known on a national basis?
I'll tell you exactly what it is, Chip. In the last, I'm going to say 20, 30 years, maybe it's the advent of the internet, but we as Americans are reading the code. We are hearing through the news or social media about these cases. And we also have pro bono organizations that are pushing some of these cases. The Tim Thomas case that we're talking about right now, the only reason I've heard about it, the only reason you've heard about it, is that Institute for Justice took the case pro bono. Otherwise, Thomas, like all private property owners and like almost all farmland owners that get in disputes with the government, have to roll. They simply have to accept what the government says.
Yeah.
So after 30, 40 years of this, all of us are asking basic questions. What does the government claim regarding their power? Because they have none, just like they have no money. They have what we give them, and same with money. They have what we give them. So it's time, I think most people feel, to simply have the government lay out what they feel they can do, and they don't want to do that.
Right. Yeah, they have the power that the people give them and that the courts give them, and that is also being challenged up in South Dakota right now. And because a lot of the government agencies had determined what power they had on by themselves for a lot of years, and that's being challenged now up in South Dakota, right?
Right. It's a wetlands case that's been going on for 20 years. Again, let me start out by saying this gentleman named Arlen Foster in Minor County, southeast South Dakota, has pro bono representation. Otherwise, his case also falls through the cracks. And the stunning part of his case is that it really lays naked what has been going on in these wetlands disputes, particularly because Foster's case is a half an acre. It's literally 0.8 acres that the government has put the clamps on. He has very reasonable arguments. Even if you disagree with him or agree with him, his arguments are very rational regarding why there is less than a foot of water sometimes on this particular spot out in this corn and soybean fields. But the kicker is, Chip, that he's never been allowed in court to simply present what he believes is going on, of course, and that relates to Chevron deference, the government's ability to rely on its own experts. Well, when that got tossed here recently, his case, along with the case that got it tossed in the Supreme Court, got a little bit of a steroid injected into it. So now Arlen's case goes to the Eighth Circuit, or back to the Eighth Circuit, and they are, on instruction by the Supreme Court, supposed to let him have his day to state what he believes is going on. Doesn't mean he will ultimately win, but it does mean that he will have the ear of the court.
Yes, and he will be able to present the evidence that he has been collecting for more than 20 years, that this is not a natural wetland, and instead it's a man-made structure, like a stock pond for cattle. The evidence seems pretty clear-cut to me, but at least now he gets an opportunity to present the evidence that he's been collecting. That's so important, right?
Correct. Just like the Tim Thomas case regarding property rights, the wetlands case regarding code and the ability of agencies and departments to keep things in-house. These cases that these farmers and landowners are bringing, they ask baseline question, which is this what our forefathers intended when the Constitution was framed in 1787? Is this what Madison meant when he laid out the Bill of Rights? I think those two questions answer themselves. And again, through social media, through the internet now, the government can't quite keep the clamps down on these questions being raised. And they are very, very legitimate questions to all of us as Americans.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we're talking about here is just the basic ability to protect your property rights and the rights that you gain when you purchase a piece of property and develop it. It can be really frustrating, and I'm the Fosters fighting this battle for the last 20 years, Chris. It blows me away. It blows me away. But go ahead, Chris.
No, it doesn't pass the smell test, Chip.
Right.
It does not pass the smell test. There's something afoul, and I must emphasize that if you were to call a government agency, let's just take NRCS off the table, USDA, and put another one in there and say, okay, how many cases involving X have there been in the last 20 years? And in NRCS's case, that would be, how many wetlands prosecutions, enforcements, regulations do you have? I'm just picking a state out of the blue, South Dakota, where Arlen Foster lives. Yeah. If I would submit to you, you will not get a response. And if you do, you will get a response that is not straight. The only cases, essentially, that you have access to are those which get litigated. And a property owner, a farmer that can go, has the legwork, has the financial legs to take the government to court year upon year, almost non-existent. So it must be said,
exactly.
Arlen Foster case, the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. Chris, good work. Go to agweb.com and read Chris's stories.
Time for Markets Now with the experts from Pro Farmer.
Joining us now, Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady. Beej, not a lot of movement in corn and soybeans, but wheat is trying. Wheat's trying to put in a rally.
Yes, the wheat market, Chip, about 10, 12 cents higher in most of the contracts across all three of those markets. And the winter wheat crop condition ratings, the initial ones that were released yesterday afternoon by USDA, second worst ever behind 2 years ago. And so significantly lower than what was anticipated. And so that's giving some support to the wheat market today, encouraging some short covering in here. But, there's also issues, other areas than here in the United States. Obviously, the Black Sea region, both Russia and Ukraine, they're dealing with issues, Australia, Argentina. And so some of those crop concerns are encouraging the corrective buying this morning.
Gotcha. It's helping out corn a little bit, isn't it?
It is, definitely. And, the ironic thing is that we didn't have a daily corn sale today, so that broke a string of 9 straight days. But yet the corn market is working to the upside because of the strength in the wheat market. Soybeans, they tried to work higher early on, but they're now a penny or two lower. Pressure coming from selling in the meal market.
All right, take us over to livestock trade and start with hogs. I mean, it's another nice move to the upside in hogs.
Absolutely. Gapped higher this morning, new contract high in the December contract, and just an explosive move to the upside. Contra-seasonal fundamental strength. So the cash index is rising contra-seasonally, so is the pork cutout, and that's providing support to the futures. On the cattle side of things, a little bit weaker tone in both live cattle and feeder cattle here at mid-morning.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. That is Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady. Get more at tryprofarmer.com.
Opinions expressed on AgriTalk do not necessarily reflect the views of Farm Journal Broadcasting, affiliate stations, or sponsors. Do you suffer from talking on the radio phobia? No problem. Send us a tweet at #AgriTalk.
All right, welcome back to AgriTalk. I'm Chip Flory. Glad that you were with us. Man, it's always fun to get Chris on here, isn't it, Davis?
Dude, I love it. Yeah. Always good stuff. But and the storytelling. Let's not get lost in the storytelling, the story itself, because the things that I don't know how he finds these stories, but the stuff that he covers is so pertinent.
Exactly. The way that he does is he is always watching for these cases, these court cases. Okay. Well, the problem with it, and the reason that it is difficult to put a number on just how many similar cases, similar conflicts have happened out there is like he said, it's because if you ask for example, South Dakota NRCS, how many of these land use cases have been prosecuted in the last 10 years, 20 years, you're probably not going to get an answer on that. But when an agency like the Pacific League or others, and the name of the group in Pennsylvania that is taking it on. But what they've got to do is these law offices have to take these cases on pro bono, okay? And otherwise the government agency just kind of outweighs you. You can go ahead and look for additional rulings on issues, but when under Chevron deference, the court would basically just say, listen, the reason that NRCS is pursuing this is because NRCS says this is the way that it should be done. That's why they're pursuing it. So we need to just defer to the expertise of NRCS. And I'm picking on NRCS here right now. I get it. But now with the Supreme Court ruling on Chevron deference, they can't do that anymore. They have to allow this. They have to allow the evidence to be presented, and when you've got the wherewithal to do that, it is being presented. All right. We've spent a fair amount of time on 45Z recently as well, for good reason. Tax credit is available to registered producers starting January 1, 2025. But here's the problem. The details of what crops, what production practices, the stuff that's needed to feed the biofuel production, we don't know what those details are. We're waiting for those details. Not from USDA, but from the Treasury Department and IRS. The USDA is trying to have some influence on this. But let's get an update now from Mitchell Hora at Continuum Ag. Mitchell, welcome back to AgriTalk, my friend. How are you?
Hey, doing well. Always good to be here with you. And yeah, still needing more of these rules to create some clarity. Yeah. But I mean, I think USDA understands the urgency of that, and obviously things are going to be changing in DC here soon. No matter what ends up happening next week with election, there's still going to be changes to be made. And so the clock is ticking. That's for sure.
Yeah. So get us up to speed on this, Mitchell. What do we need to know about this process? As I understand it, there's going to be, get us up to speed.
Yeah. So it's a couple of things that have happened here over the last couple of months. So the USDA put out a request for information this summer, and they had 26 questions that they were asking for feedback on, and people were able to submit their written comment. And we submitted comment as Continuum Ag, and about 260 other folks did as well. A lot of comments about what the USDA should do. And now they have ingested that feedback, that written feedback. And here over the last month or so, month and a half, they've hosted 3 public hearings. They were Zoom meetings about an hour to an hour and a half in length. And they let people share their comments verbally to the USDA, sharing, their thoughts and ideas about how the USDA should approach 45Z and how they should write rules. And now it's our understanding that USDA is ingesting those written comments and verbal comments and trying to put some guidance together to help the Department of Treasury with the final 45Z rules.
Okay. Have they got the right, are they all pointed in the right direction here, Mitchell? And what I mean by that is in one of your comments, you talked about maybe, climate smart farming and carbon intensity. They should be two different things, right?
Yeah. So I think, we're having a lot of conversation with USDA folks. They've been great to, try to really get this done right. I think the weight of this decision is massive, and the ripple effect that this 45Z program can have is just tremendous. So, but what we are seeing is that this administration has been very keen on this concept of climate smart ag and climate smart commodities. We saw the $3 billion go out in grants. We've seen the Climate Smart Ag pilot program introduced within the 40B guidance. And now we know that they would like to write some rules and kind of define climate smart ag and write a rule about that. But a climate smart commodity or climate smart ag and low carbon feedstocks for biofuels, they're not the same thing. They might have some overlap. They might be kind of similar. Cover crops and no-till and stuff is probably going to be included in language around both, but they're not the same thing. And we're trying to make that very clear to the USDA folks that defining climate smart ag, that's fine, but defining carbon, how to define putting together a rule about quantifying carbon intensity of feedstocks is different. And defining carbon intensity of feedstocks is already being done using the Argonne National Labs GREET model. And that's what we encourage them to use. It's very available now. And even just at Continuum Ag, we've scored over 330 million bushels using that GREET model. It's not hard to do. We can do it for free. It takes like 5 minutes. So it's a very scalable thing here. But yeah, like I said, I think they're being held up a little bit on climate smart versus CI scoring, and they need to just simplify things.
Well, and with 40B, the problem with 40B is that it set a precedent. It bundled up these production practices and said, that's what it takes to be eligible for these tax credits. Now, what we would like them to do is to have some flexibility on that going forward, right?
For sure. Yep. And in the public comments, it came up all the time. It was probably one of the biggest things that people were suggesting and giving feedback on, was overwhelmingly saying, do not use bundles, use the GREET model. Right. It's as simple as that. And in the 40B guidance, it literally says that they're using those bundles in lieu of using an actual CI calculator. And it's like, guys, you punted before. 40B was only a 2-year thing. It really didn't make that big of an impact, but it was an indicator. And obviously now in the written comment was overwhelming, saying, hey, don't use the bundle approach. And all that does is just stifle farmer innovation and just waters down the whole concept. Climate smart ag could be different bundles. That's fine, but that's different than quantifying carbon intensity of feedstocks. That's why there's a need for separation, yet similarities is fine, but it needs to be separate.
Yeah, and it is quantifiable, and you were showing that it is quantifiable on millions and millions and millions of bushels, the carbon intensity. So therefore, we need to go forward with that, and the GREET model is part of that. What is your level of optimism, Mitchell, that 45Z is going to turn into something, turn into a meaningful opportunity for farmers?
I still think it's the biggest opportunity out there. And I think as farmers, we need some light at the end of the tunnel. We need some opportunities ahead. And 45Z is still by far the biggest opportunity. The financial impact, the ripple effect that's going to have, really highlighting American ag as leading in this sustainability effort like we have been doing already for decades. Now we can just tell our story. But yeah, I see it as having just tremendous financial impact, and it's in a ripple effect that's going to go beyond corn and soybeans. It's going to go beyond biofuels. It's going to go beyond the U.S. And I'm already seeing a lot of these conversations happen. So that's why the message today, though, for farmers is pay attention to 45Z. It's going to have massive implications when it does come through. It likely will have massive implications unless they do screw it up and go with bundles and stuff and make the rules not conducive, which there's groups that are advocating for that. There were some of those groups on these hearings as well. There's plenty of folks out there that don't like row crop ag. They don't like what we're doing as American farmers. They don't like biofuels, and that's fine. Like, that's what the hearings are for, is to give your comment. Now, luckily, those were the very, very small minority, but those folks have loud voices in DC as well. But this can do a lot of good, and that's why I want them to get the rules done.
Yep. Yeah, and number one, start, if you haven't been documenting what you're doing on your farm, document it. Right? That's the starting point.
It all takes data, whether it's a tax credit or any other program. It all takes data. That's what farmers
absolutely. Mitchell, thank you so much, buddy. Keep us up to date.
AgriTalk is brought to you by Atticus, providing battle-tested chemistries you know and trust.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. Okay, we've covered the 45Z and gotten an update there from Mitchell. Another item that has generated a lot of conversation here lately is the potential use of tariffs by either a Harris or a Trump administration. It's kicked off a lot of conversation about how effective tariffs are, and even the the Soybean Association, National Corn Growers Association, commissioned a study on the effectiveness of tariffs. The best thing that this has done so far, in my opinion, is it's raised the conversation around trade and the U.S. ag trade deficit. I was looking at an item from earlier this year talking about the likelihood that the U.S. would see a record ag trade deficit in 2024. Here to talk about that right now, Betty Resnick, American Farm Bureau Federation economist. Betty, welcome to AgriTalk. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
You bet. You bet. Okay. Record ag trade deficit in 2024. Is that still the projection?
Yes, the projection is changed slightly, but we're still projected to have a trade deficit of $30.5 billion in fiscal year 24 and an even bigger one in fiscal year 25.
Well, the projection for 2024, is it getting wider? Is it narrowing as time goes on this year? What's happening there?
I need to check back for some more recent numbers. They'll publish them in November again, but it's still big. In June, they had projected it to be 32 billion, and then in August, they walked it back a little bit to 30.5 billion, but still almost doubling the trade deficit from 2023.
Okay. Now, is this is on a value basis? Is that right, or is it volume, or is the trade deficit happening on both fronts?
So the trade deficit, when we talk about it from that figure put out by the USDA Economic Research Service, it's a value basis.
Okay,
and I think that makes it a little bit tricky to talk about because what we import is a lot of really high value agricultural products like fresh fruits and vegetables and high-end wine from Europe. But at the same time, we export a lot of bulk agricultural goods like soybeans and corn. And then the decrease in commodity prices is it's really plummeted our export values in recent years. But our volumes haven't necessarily fallen the same way.
Right. Yep. And volume has backed off some on the row crop exports. Corn has come back, obviously. But soybeans were losing more. Yeah, the soybeans were losing some of that market share out to Brazil and so on. Okay, you mentioned the high value items like fruits and vegetables. When I look at the role that fruits and vegetables, horticulture products play in this trade deficit, it blows me away, Betty. How big of a chunk it is.
So about half of all of our agricultural imports by value are in the horticulture category, which again is mostly fresh and processed fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, alcohol, essential oils, and flowers, etc., things like that. And that's about half of all of our values. And it's grown quite a bit. So it's about $100 billion. And we also export in that category, but this is the category we have the biggest deficit in. Our exports in horticulture were about $40 billion in fiscal year 24.
Okay. Why? I understand that these products, fruits and vegetables, are very labor-intensive crops. Is that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's also the seasonality of it all. I mean, American consumers today expect to eat blueberries every single week of the year, and we can't grow blueberries or store them every single week of the year. So there's a lot of different factors in this horticultural space, but you're absolutely right that labor is a huge part of that. So just to compare, overall for agriculture, labor is about 10% of the cost of production across the spectrum in the United States. But for fruit, it's a little under 40% of the cost of production. And for vegetables, it's a little under 30%. So the specialty crop growers in the United States are the ones really feeling the brunt of labor shortages right now.
Right. And it's some of the rules and regulations that are in place on those on the labor. I mean, the housing requirements, overtime requirements, all of that plays a role in adding to the labor costs, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the labor for especially crop growers is coming from the H-2A program. We've seen huge growth in the H-2A program, which is really great as it is a way to access labor to help pick these crops, but it's also growing in cost quite a bit. The government sets an adverse effect wage rate, often called the AWER, and that is the minimum wage for H-2A workers in every state. And it's grown 5.9% annually since 2019, while national wages have grown under 4% annually. So it's outgrowing the pace of other wages, and it's really high. So H-2A workers in California earn $19.75 an hour in 2024, and that is about the same they would earn in a day's work in Mexico, for instance, if they're coming from there or other South American countries. So that's huge. And then in addition to that, you've got all the costs like you're alluding to on top of that, including transportation costs, housing costs, food costs, visa costs. It's not an inexpensive form of labor, but it is a reliable way to get laborers.
Okay. All right. The problem with this and the ag trade deficit in particular, people are saying, hey, let's use tariffs to fix this problem. I don't know if that's going to help fix this problem or not, Betty.
Yeah, especially with agricultural products in particular, there's just a lot of costs being had here.
Right.
I don't know if that music's coming from me or from you, but
no, that's from us, Betty. We're getting really close. We've only got about 15 seconds left here.
Oh, but my apologies. Yeah, but I would say
okay.
Also, just in general, I mean, I think that there's multiple factors here and that we need to be supporting making our producers productive here at home, and that will help with the trade deficit. But the trade deficit in itself is not inherently a problem. As we import and export different products, we do need to find ways to export more of our products abroad, and that'll help our producers here at home. In addition to
Betty, thank you